This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and this is episode 831 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by FanDuel. Thanks for tuning in. Before I get to the 10 trends this week, I want to send an update about the Tony Pollard information that I talked about yesterday on the 15 Transaction Show. I mentioned that the Cowboys have faced the 5th toughest schedule so far this year for running backs. That was wrong. It's closer to average. Everything else, though, still stands. Pollard's been totally fine in plus matchups. He's still a buy candidate. But I wanted to revise that statement because I was looking at the wrong data, so my apologies for that. It's a 10 trends episode, though. Let's get to it. We've seen a lot of teams start to regress when it comes to how they score their touchdowns. Minnesota finally has a couple of rushing scores. Tampa Bay, they're finding the end zone more on the ground too. One team that's a definite regression candidate in the opposite direction, meaning they've run for way more touchdowns than they should have so far this year, it's Baltimore. The Ravens have 27 offensive touchdowns. 17 of them have come via the ground. 37% of their touchdowns have been rushing ones. Based on their pass rate, that's roughly 17 percentage points lower than expected. Gus Edwards has benefited greatly from this, but I do expect regression. I had mentioned a few weeks ago on the 15 Transaction Show that the Dallas Cowboys passing attack was a buy candidate, specifically CeeDee Lamb. So far, so good. Over their last 3 games, where they faced the Chargers, Rams, and Eagles, Dak Prescott has ranked as the QB1, QB3, and QB2 in weekly scoring. So far this season, he's averaged 11.1 points per game when facing a team that ranks in the top half of the league in adjusted points allowed to quarterbacks. When facing bottom half opponents, that number jumps up to almost 24. Moving forward, 70% of Dallas's matchups are favorable matchups. Dak could continue to be a nice fantasy starter for you moving forward. Things have not been good for Patrick Mahomes in fantasy football. He's currently the QB5 in points per game. He's averaging 19.1 points per contest. He's pacing for his worst fantasy season as a starter by far. He hasn't even taken advantage of good matchups this year. This isn't just a schedule thing. When you adjust Kansas City's performance for strength of opponent, they come in with just the 12th best quarterback numbers in the league. So really, Mahomes' number right now might even be considered inflated, which is crazy to think about. And unfortunately, from now through the end of the year, Kansas City has the second toughest quarterback schedule by adjusted fantasy points allowed. Now, I called Mahomes a buy low a handful of weeks ago because of a good upcoming schedule. He's completely whiffed. It was an L by me. I sort of hinted at buying Alexander Mattison on this week's 15 Transaction Show, and I do think that he's an interesting buy when you consider the sentiment around Mattison. As purely a running back, he hasn't been very good this season. But it's really hard to deny their upcoming schedule alongside his usage without Cam Akers this year. Akers started to get run for Minnesota in week 4 against the Panthers. From week 1 to week 3, Alexander Mattison averaged a running back rush share per game of about 85%. His target share per game was 12.5%. That running back rush share with Cam Akers dropped by about 18 percentage points. The target share by roughly 4 percentage points. If Mattison's able to get back to his pre-Akers usage, he's got a chance to surprise a lot of people in fantasy football. We finally saw a shift in the Indianapolis backfield in Week 9. Jonathan Taylor played a season-high 75% of the team's offensive snaps. He ended up seeing 72% of the team's running back rushes and an amazing 20.8% target share. That's been really great to see from Taylor this season. In 3 of his last 4 games, he's hit an 11.5% target share. His target share per game over this time is 14%. For some perspective, Taylor's never finished a season with a target share per game rate over 10.6%. So he's been used significantly more as a pass catcher this season, and that's huge for his fantasy value. According to Fantasy Life's utilization report, which again, you can look at this for free over on fantasylife.com. But according to that utilization report, over the Falcons' last 2 games, Taylor Heineke has had average depth of targets of 11.7 and 9.4. When looking at every game from Desmond Ridder this season, he surpassed an ADOT of 9.4 0 times. So Heineke, at the very least, is pushing the ball down the field a little bit more than Desmond Ridder did. That's a good thing for the pass catchers. And this past week, the team's running backs still saw a healthy 23.5% target share. So the volume coming their way hasn't taken that much of a hit. Another fun one with average depth of target is with the Tennessee Titans. They've used Will Levis for 2 games now. In those 2 games, Levis has had ADOTs of 11.8 and 10.8 according to Fantasy Life. Ryan Tannehill, across his 6-game sample this season, was north of a 10 ADOT just once. So Levis, just like Heineke, is chucking it down the field a lot more for his team. Aaron Jones this past weekend had his best outing since week 1, and his volume metrics shed light to that. He saw a season-high 61% running back rush share and a season-high 24% target share. The main issue that I have, well, there's probably 2 issues. One is that Green Bay's offense, really bad. That's going to limit anyone in that offense. But Jones still played just 57% of the team's snaps. They're still splitting that backfield. But Jones is such a good player when he's healthy that he can still be impactful in fantasy football even with a non-elite snap share. But for context, that snap share this past week, it ranked 21st in the league at running back. The Baltimore defense has been insane against quarterbacks this year. They rank as the toughest matchup by adjusted fantasy points allowed, and they've given up just 1 top 15 performance this season. That performance, Josh Dobbs, of course. But Geno Smith last week, 2.7 fantasy points. Jared Goff in week 7, 9.4 fantasy points. You probably shouldn't start Deshaun Watson this week. The last trend this week is about Jerome Ford, a player who gets the Ravens this weekend. We got a lot more Ford in week 9, which was good to see after his ankle injury, because in week 8, Ford handled just 27% of Cleveland's running back rushes, and he had a 6.7% target share. This past week, his snap share almost doubled, and he hit a 54% running back rush share. That was his 3rd highest of the season. His 25% target share was his absolute highest, and his route participation of 67% was the highest of the season too. As I mentioned a few weeks ago before that ankle injury, Cleveland running backs have a very juicy rest of season schedule. It's now 7th best according to my numbers, and it's 3rd best during the fantasy playoffs. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you get subscribed to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter @LateRoundQB. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'll talk to you tomorrow with the Weekly Sleeper Show.